I'm Clint, and we have a portfolio review and some paintovers on this episode of Swatches. I'd like to start by thanking Pat Garden, who volunteered his work to be publicly reviewed for this video. It is his portfolio that we'll be looking through and doing paintovers with. So, sir, I salute you. Everyone else, if you're interested in having your portfolio reviewed and having some paintovers done of yours in the future, then leave me a comment below with a link to your gallery and make sure you mention that that is what the link is for. And with no further ado, let's jump into Photoshop and start taking a look at some images. When reviewing a portfolio, I want to start by looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the artist and the artwork. And in looking at the weaknesses, I want to start by looking at the systemic problems that the artwork has. It's those problems that arise over and over again throughout the artwork. Those are the larger problems, and if you can correct those, then it will have a larger impact in the long run, and not just looking at, oh, a little tweak here, a little tweak there. All right, so let's pull up some of the images, and we'll flip through these. I'll let you guys have a look at them, and then we'll go into Photoshop and probably do a paint over of 2 or 3 of these guys. So we've got a witch doctor in a cave being attacked, changing gears completely over to an environment. We've got another landscape image, but quite different this time. Nighttime, some sort of spaceship, attack, an underground image, a vista, nice. It would be a revised version of the lightning character from Final Fantasy. An attack scene, close up this time of a main character. Action background. A lot going on in this scene. Very nice. Science fiction feel here. And general scene, military place. Now, I don't know the stories behind these images. I don't know if they were made for anything in particular except for the lightning image. I know that was made for something specific. So, strengths. Let's talk about those first. I don't know if you saw what I saw, but one of the first things that strikes me is that he has a really great range of subjects. It's not somebody who draws 12 different versions of this witch doctor. He is not afraid to really get out there and just try a bunch of different things. Like we saw, character, landscape, different kind of landscape, action landscape, underground, above ground, tight shot, far shot. Lots of great stuff there as far as wide range of subject matter, wide range of lighting. This is lit by a pole. This is lit by the sky. This is lit by fire, attack, lasers. This has an ominous forward light. We've got spotlights here. We've got flare stuff going on. We've got mood set with rain. We've got flashlights. The guy has a wide range of lighting tools. Some people get stuck in trying to light things the same way with just the sun, perhaps, and that's not always a good idea. Those I see as 2 of his main strengths. He isn't afraid of trying a lot of stuff. He's not trying to hide hands. He's not trying to hide people because he seems afraid of it. Now let's look at some of the weaknesses or systemic weaknesses. Here, I would see some of the major problems being a really high fall off between highlights to shadows. That seems to be a problem. There's very little midtones and it weakens the image. Otherwise, I'd see the problems being what I consider chalk and charcoal. It's in my ebook, that's what I refer to it as. That is the overuse of white to lighten things and the overuse of black to darken things. And you get this hazy look. Several of his images have a hazy appearance to them. The tones are not very rich in color. The darks are not very rich in darks. And even the lights don't have much color to them. You can see that a lot in this image. It has that sort of hazy appearance. Here as well, you can see a lot of gray. There's a lot of grayness throughout the images where he's tried to use light or very light tones to brighten right over very dark things, and that will give that effect. One of the other issues that I see throughout the work is that of composition and horizon line. But specifically look at some of those in Photoshop. Okay, so I will minimize this and pop one of these open. Let's start with this one. Okay, one of the problems with this image that I'm seeing is that it splits the image horizontally with the composition. Now this is a problem because you need to use the composition to tell the viewer where the focal points are and where to look. When you divide the image directly in half, like you do here, you've divided the image. There's a very clear top side and a very clear bottom side to the image. This tells the viewer that you are completely split about which is the focal point. Is it about the people down here? Is it about the city up here? When it's perfectly divided, it creates a tension that does not help the image. How can you correct this? Well, there's a couple of different ways that you could go about it. One is simply cropping the image differently. How could you crop it differently and to make it work? Well, one variation would be to do this sort of way. It is now clear that the top part of this image, the cityscape, is the image, and you still have enough of the bottom side to use it as the visual comparison of high society or technology to very low. That works fine, that composition. So by having the low horizon line in this case, we know that this top part is the subject matter. However, if we crop it the other way, say we crop off the top of those buildings and come down here, we immediately tell the viewer that this part of the image is the focal point. If the horizon is high, then it pushes the eye low and tells us that's the important part. Personally, I think that some of this isn't really necessary since there isn't a specific character or event happening down here. Then I would see cropping it along this line. So let's recrop it, cut out some of that on the bottom, push the image back up to the top. Let's start by rebalancing some of the lights and darks. Like we mentioned earlier, the whole thing is grayed out a lot. There's not much color, there's not much intensity. What we want to do is build a mood and a lighting scheme back into the image. Pulling up our values menu, I'm going to re-pull the darks into the image since there was no blacks in this image. So rebalance that. Not quite so much. Down to about there. I want to adjust the tones and the colors of just the bottom. I will enter a quick mask mode and I will mask out everything except for the bottom. That was using the Q. I will hide that selection and now I'm going to go back into my levels and I'm going to pull down my lights so that I am lowering the maximum white value of the lower half of the image. They don't have any extra lighting down here. I see no external electric lights or any other kind of lights. So this area would be darker. This area does have extra lights and it has access to the sun a bit more. This wall would be blocking a lot of that from the bottom side. Now I also want to tint this bottom side towards a magenta. I want to bring some of the red back into the scene with the sky. I'm going to inverse my selection so I have the top selected and hide that and go into my gradients and choose something along this lines. Overlay. Now I'm using a custom-made gradient to a basic sunset scheme set to horizontal overlay at 43% over my main layer. I'm starting at the bottom where the light part is, going up to the top. Now with the overlay, it's adding a lot of color back into that part of the image. I'm going to go back into adjust vibrancy and add even more vibrancy to it. Now all of a sudden, we have a lot more color in this image. Now if we go back to the original, look at it, see how very grayed out it is, and then it has a lot more color. Now you could accentuate that a little bit. I'm going to grab above that fence there and use a nice large brush, go back to overlay, and we can see that the light, even around the sun, isn't quite as bright as it could be. So I'm going to the dodge tool, setting it to highlights. It's currently at 30%. That should be fine. And I want to just brighten some of that light area up. There we go. Now, that's a way to re-crop the image to tell the viewers where the focal area is and bring some color back into the scene. Now, all of a sudden, it's got more mood to it, it's got more color to it, and it has more of a focal point. Now, this wouldn't be a finished version of the image. I would continue on, and I would suggest to continue on with this mindset and make other smaller changes to it. But this should serve, as the rest of these paintovers, as proofs of direction that you could take the image. All right, let's move along to a different one. Now here we have a couple of compositional snafus. The first being that the image is almost perfectly divided vertically in the center, not with just the character being located there, but this very straight, clear column being put there, as well as the river just off to the side with a split right in the middle. What that does is makes this side of the image very visually heavy, and there is almost nothing on that side of the image. Well, this is not a good idea. It should be relatively balanced, and at this point it's not balanced at all. Now, there are numerous ways that you could correct this compositionally. I mean, you could add more things over here, you could do a lot of stuff to it. But let's look at some simple ones, and ones that personally I would do myself. Let's grab the character and the end of this rock. Cut off some of that right there. And I'm going to copy that, paste it down, and enlarge it. Even though the character will be smaller than the columns, the character brings a more weight to it by importance. Therefore, a smaller character on this side could visually offset a larger inanimate object on the other side. Just erase out some of that. I do want a bit more distance. So I'm going to add some more atmosphere so that the darks down there on the ground aren't quite as dark as the rock here in the foreground. Now compositionally, this column is still not a good decision. It's not that there couldn't be a column, but I would say that it probably should not be right there. Let's move that over a bit and just say that there is a column more along that line. Again, I'm going through this very quickly, and I'm just doing a rough job of it for you can tell the direction that I'm talking about, and that's pretty much it. Now, something else that you want to do is adjust the color of this river. Now, water does have a small amount of innate blueness, but it's generally not as blue as you think. People have the idea that it's bluer than it is because it's usually reflecting the sky outside, which of course is generally blue itself. So in this environment, it would be more gray-brown since it's reflecting the gray-brown of the cavern ceiling. So I'm just tinting that with a color brush. And also want to adjust the course of this river. The fact that it's running almost straight down towards us is very odd, and to put it in the middle of the composition like that is not the most solid idea. What you can do is, this is fine, keeping it running in here, keeping it running out there, but let's say instead that this is running more like that. Now I like the idea that there's a little overlapping right here, that the river goes in behind this rock, and that gives more idea that this rock is going out into space. So now if we bend that, it leads the eye from this dark corner where there isn't really anything to look at. It leads it up to the character, and from the character it tells us to look over this way. I would also probably have some big stalactite formation thing here, because as soon as the eye gets from here to the character and over here, we don't want the eye running off the image. We need some sort of horizontal, strong horizontal, diagonal break here to keep the eye from going too far off the image. So having a series of stuff there would help keep the eye in the image. And with the column moved over. Now I probably want to also work on this character a little bit. I'm going to go back to my dodge tool, set for highlights, and just hit the highlights on this character a bit more. I want to make sure she stands out. Now compositionally, this holds up a lot better than that. You can see that leads the eye. The character on this side and this rock outcropping helps to balance out the columns on that side, just flipping back and forth. There might be a specific reason why these columns look like this, but my thought is they're a little too uniform, and there's a lot of chance that you could make more use of them than this. Like if you started making them into arches, like if this was a series of columns that were being used to support, some sort of city or whatever, then columns are always the most ideal support system because of the strength that you get out of that actual shape. Now, I'm just making up some arch stuff. When you start arching these up and maybe thinking about each one of these being the end of a cathedral, like the buttress to a cathedral, then you can have these arch patterns going everywhere. You could have a big one and use that to keep you in the image on that side. You could have a little detail on this close piece of the arch, which you would then associate with the same amount of detail being on these back ones. And so you could be doing this sort of thing. And also you have the opportunity to do some architecture, and you could have like broken arches. You could have one that's kind of broken here with a piece of it, lying down between the other ones. And you could have, other broken pieces kind of sticking up along the other parts. And maybe you would even want to have some atmosphere, some sort of foggy thing going on. So you just have the arches kind of coming out of a mist. That could be kind of cool. The broken pieces of arches kind of peeking up through the fog. That would be nice. So you can add more atmosphere like that. That would be neat. I think architecture and architectural element could be good if you, whether you want to go with arches or not, but it lends itself to having that possibility. Okay, so that was some thoughts on that composition. Let's close that. And let's look at one more before we wrap it up. First thing is, again, sort of systemic problem with everything looking very gray, not a lot of color here. The values aren't very strong. So let's go back to doing that and also look at a couple of the compositional things here. Make some duplicates of this layer. And I'll start by rebalancing the darks using the levels. Bring some of the blacks back up. I'm going to bring it not quite that much, and then bring the midtones down a bit. Okay. And before we do more color work, let's reproportion this guy. He's close, but right now the legs are a bit too short. He has more upper body than he has legs. So I'm going to grab his upper body, just using a lasso tool. Copy that, paste it, shove it up a bit, hide it again. I then want to grab his legs, and copy and paste them, and hold them up to meet the top of the body. There. So now you can see him stretched out a little bit, a little more accurate as far as proportion of legs to the upper body, or vice versa. And I'm going to just paint the edges in there a little bit. Again, this is rough. I'm not going to do a real finesse job with that. Okay, and I'll go ahead and push them into the background. I want to resaturate this image, going up to Image, Adjust, Vibrancy. Hit it with some vibrancy, hit it with some saturation. For the sky, I feel like we're missing out on some of the tones that should be back here. Also missing out on some of the color that should be in the sky. So what I want to do is, I found this image. Well, let's be clear, I do not own this image. I think I grabbed it off of like Corbis or Getty Images. I don't own this. We're just using this as a reference. I'm not using this professionally as part of our project. Okay, it's a quick way to give an example to something. So I'm copying that, just the sky and a piece of the background there. I'm going to paste that in and scale that up here. Now this gives us a nice example of some far back tones and sky tones. I'm only going to carry it all the way across, might as well. Okay, now I don't want to cover up my character, so I'm going to put in a mask, and I'm going to paint my character out. Again, rough mask to get the point across here. Okay, now I want to be able to move this background image without the mask moving, because right now the mask will move with it. So I'll hit this chain on the layers palette, which will unlink the two. I can now move the image separate from the mask that I just made. Right, now, I say that because I will want to move the horizon. At this point, the horizon is right here. In case you didn't know, the horizon is always eye level. Whatever your eye level is, that is what the horizon is, and vice versa. It is always that way. The only time that is not that way is when you're outside of Earth's atmosphere. But as long as you're within Earth's atmosphere, the horizon is eye level. That's a problem because this hat is curving downwards, which means that we're looking down slightly on the top of this guy's head, which means that the horizon would need to be above that. That's a problem, because obviously it's not, it's down here. The horizon needs to be brought up into this vicinity, I would say, somewhere along here. Or this character needs to be repainted so that we're looking up at him and not down on him. By bringing it up, we will be getting towards the 1/2 mark. We don't want to put it directly in the middle of the image, so it'll need to be a bit higher or lower than that. So I want to move this horizon up to about there. And that should work. I also want to adjust this orange tone. Let's use a gradient here. Go back into quick mask mode and run the gradient again. Get back out of quick mask, hide that, and I'm going to use a tint photo filter to shove that to the green side. Okay, now I'll be able to work that in to my background a little better. I'm going to fuzz this out. Like I said, this is a quick and rough way to throw in some colors and some background there. I'll saturate that background a bit and paint out the rest there. I also want to continue the same tone here. I'm going to ignore the planes for this moment. I'll assume that if you can do everything else, you can put the planes back in there. Right, now we have a more authentic color scheme to be working this background on. And I'm going to start using a new layer on top of this one that bridges some of the greens and browns and that sort of thing that we had from the photo. Another issue arises that it's obviously a very bright day here in the background, but however the tones here do not indicate any direct light on this character. Even on these guys, the only time that we get any sense of direct light is here on this guy's face, but the rest of him doesn't really indicate that. So my thought is to make it as if all these guys are in shadow. There's possibly a cloud overhead that's casting these guys in the shadow, and then this base and stuff down here can be in the light. So I'm going to shadow the foreground. I'm going to make a new layer, set it to darken, and I'm going to pick dark blue tone and put it down to about 33% or so. Now what it's going to do is tint down all the lights in the foreground and make them cooler. This is kind of like putting a shadow on everything in the foreground. I'm going to adjust the tone there. Make it not quite so blue. Just tone it out a little bit and push it slightly to the violet side. Okay. So you can see that on and off. It just tone downs the lights and it tones the colors together. It kind of keys them together. I want to brighten the midground, making a new layer, so that it's clear that this is shaded and this is not. So what I'm going to do is grab some yellow-green color and repaint some of this closer part of the ground back there. And then it'll be clear that one part has more sunlight than the other part. Now I also want to shade down the faces a bit more since they're in shadow. Obviously this is rough, but if you pull out of it, you can see how now shaded foreground, lit background, colors them a little more believable. We can flip back to the original Now, this is the problem, is that when you start working on the image and you start getting it grayed out, you start basing everything on the part that was already grayed, and you forget how much value and how much color that you're leaving out of the image. And now you can see the difference there. One other thing that I would want to do from this point, aside from obviously finessing all the edges and doing some of the detail around the stuff to make sure it's fitting the characters correctly, is to come up here and grab a sky tone, but a darker version of it, and that would be, there would be sort of a fill light from the sky that would still be lighting the top of everything, because the sky is so bright, it's bouncing light around in the atmosphere and coming down. That helmet still needs to be going up. We're still looking up at that helmet a little bit. So trying to change that. And we'd have this sort of blue tone. On the tops. Now some material like the shirt here probably would not reflect very much. We're not talking about highlights, and we're not talking about specular lights. We're just talking about an ambient lightness on the top of things versus the bottom of things towards the blue spectrum. The only real shadows here would be kind of occlusion shadows. Those shadows like back in here where there just simply isn't a way for light to weave itself into the little nooks and crannies. But otherwise, the main shadows are done away with, and the main differences between one edge and another edge is just that of the base color versus the color of the object next to it. So now you can see that sort of blue tone put on top. We have a little more reflection from the sky. I might even go a bit lighter than that, so I can use my dodge tool to just hit some of the spots there. And you would continue that on with these guys too. They would need some of the same blue light. Now if you want this idea explored more with the light from the sky and from reflected light, that sort of thing, check out James Gurney's book, Light and Shadow. That would be his second book, his art book. And he explores that really well in a lot of different situations. I don't want to go into it too much here. And that would be the direction that I would think you could take with it. So let's flip back to the original and back off. So, key things that we're looking at, just as a quick recap. The gray tones, don't use white to brighten things. Use a more vibrant mid-tone. If you start getting that way, then try to resaturate it or introduce a photo element, a piece of photo that will give you a good starting palette that you can then continue out through the rest of the image. Don't forget to rebalance your values. If you pull up your value scale and you have a big blank there, that means that you don't have anything getting next to black. You need full range of values for most images, so make sure that you're getting into those darks, making use of those. But otherwise, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. Again, thanks for Pat Garden, who had the gumption to allow us to review this publicly. If you have an idea for an upcoming video, then feel free to leave me a comment below. I do read all of those. And until I see you again, keep drawing.